This episode is about the Toronto Transit Strike of 1886. However, this isn't the transit that we all know today. There were no buses or subways in 1886, just horse-drawn streetcars. There was also no TTC. All of these vehicles were controlled by the Toronto Railway Company that had a monopoly on Toronto streetcars. Finally, this strike wasn't about a pay increase or more sick days. It was about the very right for workers to join a labor union. And it happened at a time when the conflict between workers and employers was becoming increasingly heated and sometimes even violent. Greg Koabel of the Nations of Canada podcast joins us to talk about this sometimes forgotten moment in Toronto's history. I'm Adam Weiser.
And I'm Grayson Miller, and this is Muddy York.
As we mentioned in the intro, this episode is about the 1886 transit strike. Now, this event took place almost 150 years ago, but labor issues continue to be an ongoing concern in Toronto, and this was an important step in the unionization process. So hopefully it will shine some light on current events. And we're very happy to welcome Greg Koabel of the Nations of Canada podcast. The Nations of Canada podcast is a very detailed look at Canadian history. So if you want something more than what you just got in your history textbook, Greg is your source. He also has summaries of many of his episodes posted on the Line website. And he's also here to promote something new. Greg, what have you got for us now?
I actually have very exciting, a book coming out in May for a May 6th release date called The Making of Canada. It's essentially a history of Canada up until Confederation, told through 20 different individual biographies that sort of shape a different or demonstrate a different part of the DNA of Canada, sort of developing in real time. So we've got a lot of exciting stories of a wide variety of different Canadians.
Nice. That's very cool. And where can people get their hands on that?
So right now it's available for pre-order from Amazon or Indigo or really any other online place you'd order a book from. The sort of day it's going to be out physically on the shelf is May 6th. So if you like going into the store and buying the book in hard copy that way, it's May 6th.
So we'll provide some links for that in the show notes. And May 6th, if you tweet us, we'll tweet it out too. So we'll get that done too. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so we're here to talk about the railway transit strike 1886. Let's dive in.
So what was the labor situation in Toronto in the 1880s?
It was actually undergoing a tremendous amount of change and transition, which is one of the reasons the transit strike or Toronto Street Railway strike happened. There were sort of two forces that were really changing how labor worked in Toronto. One was the Knights of Labor, which was a labor organization that actually originated in the United States, but was coming into Canada in the 1880s and in Toronto in particular. And it had a very different approach to labor relations that previous groups have had. Traditionally in Toronto and in Canada, labor was a matter of craft associations. So you had groups of workers, usually skilled in one particular area, that banded together and sort of pursued their own interests. The Knights of Labor, on the other hand, was a class-wide organization that sought to unite the working class into one movement that would have greater economic and social and political leverage. So this was a dramatic change in how labor politics was approached, and it was very much new for Toronto. Toronto, before that, had really had a kind of patronage approach to labor politics, where the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party both had their contacts in labor leadership and essentially traded votes for jobs for people connected to those groups. So this was a major change for Toronto. The second important change was the rise of reform in Toronto. This was more of a middle class movement that really sort of meshes with our story, because the sort of quintessential reform mayor in Toronto, William Howland, came into office in January 1886, just literally just weeks before this strike. And his role in it is pretty crucial. How this all affected labor is that the reform movement, the sort of Christian civic reform movement that William Howland represented, was very concerned with alleviating the ills of industrial society. So they were cracking down on drinking. They were cracking down on prostitution, looking to reduce the corruption of industrial capitalists. And part of that was also labor reform. So workplace safety, treating workers as humans, making sure they had good conditions in their factories. And this meshed with labor, but it wasn't entirely seamless, because this was a middle class movement. It was quite paternalistic. So they were not interested in the kind of class reassessment of how class politics works, where the working class would sort of express their political and economic influence as a class. They were more interested in maintaining class distinctions, but making sure that working class people had a Christian humanities to their
So
life.
just to clarify, they didn't necessarily want working class people to be in charge. They just thought that the people who were already in charge, mostly them, should treat the working class a bit better.
Right, exactly. Yes. They weren't looking to sort of change the structure of capitalist society. They were looking to improve lives.
So, something that unfortunately always mattered in Toronto at this time was the religious distinction. Uh, Protestant Catholic back then, today barely anyone notices, but it was a huge divide back then. And how did that play into the labor movement?
Actually, it plays into the labor movement in a very specific way with the Toronto Street Railway Company. So it's sort of a good way to segue into the sort of the main topic we're covering, because the owner of the Toronto Street Railway Company, Frank Smith, was a very prominent Catholic politician. Um, and just a little bit of background on the Toronto Street Railway Company. In 1861, the city signed a 30-year charter with this company to operate a horse-drawn car system throughout the city. So rails were laid down, horses would carry passenger cars along those rails. In 1881, so 20 years into this 30-year charter, Frank Smith came in and became the majority shareholder of the Toronto Street Railway Company. He was a Catholic wholesale businessman in Toronto. And importantly, he was also a senator and cabinet minister in Ottawa. He didn't have a portfolio, really. Technically, he didn't have a portfolio, but his effective portfolio was to be the representative of Irish Catholics in Ottawa. That was sort of his persona. And this definitely played into how he was perceived as a owner of a company, because he didn't fit in at all well with the rest of Toronto's sort of business elite, which tended to be Protestant, and quite often Methodist. And they really bought into this paternalist civic reform movement in their relationships with labor, whereas Frank Smith was much more your sort of typical capitalist who sort of was looking for every advantage he could get. And this, of course, played into sort of the typical Protestant Catholic divide, in that the sort of larger Protestant elite of Toronto really saw him as doing something very different from what they were trying to do.
I was reading that Frank Smith had some interesting working conditions for the employees. So, do you have any information on that? What were the conditions like for employees under Frank Smith's ownership?
One of the interesting things about his company is that he primarily employed Catholic labor. which was an opportunity Catholics didn't often get in government jobs in Toronto, as that those usually went to Protestants. So, in a sense, he was this champion of Catholic workers, but in another way, he saw Catholic workers as an easily exploitable class because they didn't have a lot of other options. So he would do things like mandate 14-hour workdays. He also made them sign ironclads, which were essentially each individual worker had to sign a pledge that they would never join in any kind of labor organization. And if they even were discussed it or thought about it, that was grounds for him to immediately fire them. So he got them to sort of commit to never organizing. Um, he also, the interesting thing about how he ran the company is that he managed to annoy both workers and Toronto residents at the same time. So one of his main goal really was to take the charter he had from the city and really go through it with a fine tooth comb and fulfill as little as possible, as little as he legally could, all of his obligations through the charter. Um, and at the same time limit the amount that he invested in his workforce or in his cars or anything like that. So the working conditions could be quite grim because he would never update the cars, replace old cars. So they were could be quite rickety and dangerous to operate. He wouldn't invest much in the actual railways that they ran on. So it could be a rough and maybe even dangerous job at times. And he didn't. He also didn't treat the customers of the railway very well either. So the although he operated multiple different rail lines around throughout the city, he didn't offer a transfer system. So if you got on one line and had to connect to another one, you'd have to pay a whole other fare for that, which people complained a lot about. And he really got away with it because it wasn't in the original charter, because way back in 1861, they didn't really imagine the street railway system having multiple lines all
Well,
over
what do you
the
think?
place.
This is
That
London. I
wasn't.
mean, Toronto is a small town. We're not going to need more than one streetcar line. That's still the same attitude that
Exactly.
City Hall has today.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's that's one of the funny things with the story is the sort of the connections you can see even today and how city infrastructure works. The
So,
one no sorry no
oh
go ahead.
no, continue.
I was going to say the one funny anecdote that I picked up in reading about this is um, one of the things that Smith's company was responsible for was maintenance in winter, so clearing the tracks so that the cars could actually run. So what he would do was just clear the snow off the actual tracks and just dump it on the side of the actual street going up all the way. So on Yonge Street, he would actually just plow the snow off the rails onto the actual street, essentially blocking the rest of the street for everyone else. So Yonge Street businesses would hire not young children, but children to shovel the snow back onto the tracks. And then it would just be a sort of a war over the snow all winter between the railway company and the Yonge Street businesses.
What a Canadian story. I love it.
So, what was the trigger that first started the chain of events that led to these strikes?
So it actually all begins with the election of William Howland as mayor in January 1886. Howland runs on a reform platform of cleaning up the city, cleaning up corruption, all that kind of stuff. But he also runs on a labor platform. And he actually gets the endorsement of the city's organized labor groups that are really emerging at this period, largely pushed by the Knights of Labor. So he wins on a labor platform. And that really emboldens the workers of the city to start taking on the more powerful interests that they've been working under. And the first is actually Hart Massey, who owns the Massey Harris agricultural equipment plant.
People today might know them from Massey College or Massey Hall.
Exactly. Very, very big Toronto family. This is where all that wealth that built all that throughout the 20th century started from. And they're actually successful in battling Massey Harris and sort of achieving their goals of better working conditions. And they're actually successful with the aid of the mayor, William Howland. So this alliance between the mayor and labor is actually continuing post-election. The next battle, which is in March, so really just about 6 weeks after the election, and the big battle is with Frank Smith at the Toronto Street Railway Company. On March 10th, Smith decides that he sort of has heard rumors of the Knights of Labor and labor organizers infiltrating his company. So on March 10th, he locks out about 20 to 30 workers that he suspects are fomenting organization within his company. He's sort of exercising his right. They violated those agreements they signed that they wouldn't organize, so I'm going to lock these guys out. It unfortunately backfires because although he's really trying to limit it to the ringleaders, which is about 30, he has about 300 workers in total, so this is about less than 10% of his workers. It turns out that more than 150 refuse to come to work in solidarity with those that are locked out. So it's actually more than half his workforce is on strike effectively. And what's more, the people of the city tend to sympathize with the workers, mostly because he's just run this business in such a aggressive fashion that he hasn't won many friends in Toronto. So there's lots of support for the strike on that first day. There's sort of a coordinated campaign with porters and carts carrying coal around the city, where they actually block the railway for the passenger cars trying to run through. They'll sort of pretend they have a breakdown and can't move from the rails. And whenever the company employees manage to push them out of the way, that 10 feet down the line, another cart would pull the same thing.
So this was an attempt to shut down the entire system.
Yes, it was not just a refusal to work, but also for the sort of skeleton crews that were still trying to maintain the cars. There was an effort among not just the workers, but actually some allies in the rest of the city to prevent this from happening.
Right.
One car. Oh, sorry.
No. So speaking of those allies, I was pretty interested. What factors contributed to the public support for the striking workers, and how did that come out during the strike?
So there's different types of allies, I guess you could say. The sort of coal carts and porters, you could see that as a kind of working class solidarity, that they would be involved in the same types of developing labor organization in the city. They likely would have Knights of Labor contacts across several different industries. So it's tough to say how coordinated it was in sense of planning, because all of this really happened quite suddenly. But certainly there would be knowledge among other workers in the city of what was going on and a desire to pitch in and help. You also have other allies that lent their support in different ways. Sort of dissatisfaction with how the railway was run would led quite a few more, you would say, middle class or respectable citizens to not necessarily get involved in preventing cars from running, but sort of expressing their support. There was a carnival atmosphere of people coming out just to see what was going on and sort of enjoying the show. At one point, a group of young men actually detached one of the carts from its horse team and manhandled it into a snowbank on Yonge Street, which I'm not exactly sure how to read that as sort of class solidarity support or just young guys looking to have a good time, sort of taking advantage of the sort of fun atmosphere. But inevitably, it created or highlights the same kind of split that I started this talk with, between the labor movement and the civic reform movement. So working class workers organizing and middle class sort of Christian ethics, maintaining the respectability of Toronto as a city. Those two are sort of always in tension while this is going on, because it's one thing to want better conditions for workers and want a better street railway, but it's another thing for upstanding middle class businessmen to see sort of chaos on the streets.
So how did the city and the police react to these events?
So it's actually, there's a bit of a split in that the mayor very publicly backed the workers and chastised Smith for how he ran his railway, essentially blaming him for this entire episode, saying if you had treated your workers fairly, we wouldn't be in this mess. But the police actually do help Smith on the third day of the strike. So the first day, there's a lot of obstruction on the cars. The second day, the popular support is so strong that the street railway can't even get its cars out of its stables. It's essentially shut down all day. But on the third day, there's a fairly large confrontation, and the police play an important role. Despite the mayor blaming Smith for the strike, the police are actually essentially commissioned to escort these cars out of the stables. And the main stable is on George Street, right between Front and King. And so the idea on the third day was the police would sort of lead the way, clearing the tracks, making sure no carts were on the tracks so the cars could run smoothly. They actually, for their first car, they actually made a mistake. The police were clearing off King Street, but the car actually accidentally went down front, and so that car got stopped. But the second one, they managed to get all down Front Street and then going up Yonge. There's sort of a running battle. Estimates are that there were about 7,000 people sort of watching this, not directly involved in the conflicts, but plenty of people watching this. So in the sort of running battle up Yonge Street, there's 18 people get arrested. There's sort of chaotic scenes the whole way, and it really scares sort of the middle class element, the respectable reformers that to this point were backing the workers. They're a bit spooked by all this chaos.
So this strike would only last 3 days. How did it come to an end?
So ultimately, it came to an end with a compromise, with Smith sort of realizing that at the moment the city was against him and he wasn't able to operate his cars with skeleton crews as he hoped. Having the police escort every car wasn't a realistic option. But on the other hand, Mayor Howland realizing that as much as he blamed Smith for what was happening, the continued sort of anarchy in the streets wasn't a good look for him. That wasn't what his idea of labor reform was all about. So the two came to a compromise where essentially on paper it looks like a defeat for Smith because it's a truce. The sort of work stoppage comes to an end. Workers go back to work, and Smith's concession that essentially it makes this a defeat for him is that he agrees to allow everyone who he originally locked out back in. So whether you had ties to the Knights of Labor, whether you were attempting to unionize in the company, he recognizes that he just doesn't have the power to exclude those guys. They're welcomed back in. But the key aspect of this is that Smith retains the sort of sense that we're returning to the status quo, so I'm welcoming these guys back, but they're still obligated under those agreements to not unionize. So if they try to unionize again, I reserve the right to kick them out again. So what you essentially get after the 3 days is a ceasefire, and one that really isn't likely to last long.
So the next time these events would heat up was in May. What happened in the interim that led to the second part of this strike?
Perhaps the most important thing that sort of gave Smith the opportunity to push again happened outside of Canada. On May 4th in Chicago, there was a massive demonstration for an 8-hour workday. This Knights of Labor sort of labor movement was a North American phenomenon, and Toronto's story is really part of a much larger one. And the reason this demonstration in Chicago was so important for our story is that the police in Chicago tried to break it up. Someone within the demonstration actually hurled a dynamite bomb. In the chaos, 11 people were killed, dozens were injured. It was sort of the nightmare that even middle-class allies of the labor movement had feared, that if you allow this kind of class warfare to fester, you're going to get violence, you're going to get chaos, you're going to get anarchy. And so in Toronto, that really shifted the dynamic of those two sides of the labor movement, the working class and the middle class. And Smith senses this. And on May 8th, so just 4 days after the chaos and violence in Chicago, he once again locks out the workers that he feels are trying to organize. Now, what's different about this second strike, or the reopening of the strike, is that the labor organizers take a very different approach. Rather than attempting to obstruct the existing Toronto Street Railway system, they decide that they're going to introduce their own competing transit system. And it's actually going to be free. So they organize with other street railway workers in Ontario who donate buses or donate cars for them to use. They take in donations from other labor groups to sort of fund this as a free service, so passengers don't pay at all. And it actually works for about a month. Toronto's probably at its best served in terms of transit. It's got 2 transit systems operating at the same time. One of them is free, so the people of the city are loving it. It's like a glory day, a golden age for transit. But it doesn't last. It's not sustainable. Part of the problem is that the workers who are actually on strike, the Toronto Street Railway workers, are a bit frustrated with how this is all set up, because it's Toronto's leading Knights of Labor organizers who are running this free bus service. And they're taking all the money that's being raised in support of the movement to pay for this bus system. And the people on strike aren't actually getting much money. So they're sort of grumbling about, the strike is supposed to be about us, but you seem to be making some kind of larger point about the labor movement. You're trying to make this a much larger battle, whereas we're just not getting any
Well,
money.
what was the larger goal
And
that they had in mind with this bus system?
so I think the goal was to establish a wider organized kind of working class solidarity that would be able to exert political pressure. And you actually see this in federal and provincial elections that happened in 1887, so a few months after this. The same Knights of Labor organizers that put together this free bus service, they also organized a political convention where they say, we're going to put forward candidates in the federal and provincial elections that aren't going to be the traditional labor candidate where you're running under a liberal or conservative banner and you're sort of allying yourself with that kind of political party network. We're going to run independent labor candidates and form essentially our own labor political party. And I think the free bus service was kind of a first tentative step towards that, where we're going to organize an infrastructure where labor leaders in Oshawa and Hamilton and London are all going to work together. We're going to communicate with one another. We're going to build sort of an institution really that didn't exist before. At that point, labor in Ontario was very much a local thing. Like, you would organize with your fellow workers in your city, but there wasn't a lot of communication more broadly. So I think the free bus service was really like a first step towards that kind of regional, provincial-wide sort of organization.
So, how did the strike proceed?
So it eventually collapses in June, in part due to these divisions within the labor movement over whether this free bus service is really a good idea. There's accusations that some of the leading Knights of Labor guys running it aren't being entirely transparent about where the money's coming from, how they're spending the money. There's also a sort of counterintuitive element to this strategy, in that one of the, you would say, points of a transit strike is to inconvenience the people of the city, to get them to say, okay, we need put pressure on the government. You need to step in and solve this problem. We're not getting to work. We can't move around the city. The government has to step in and do something. The problem with the free bus service is that you don't get any of that pressure. because while people might support the workers, and in fact, quite often the people that got on the free bus service would offer a voluntary fee because they wanted to support the cause, no one's being inconvenienced. There's not any great pressure on the city government to do anything. Torontonians are frankly pretty happy with how the transit system's working. Um, and then but the final straw is in June. One of the barns that's holding the majority of the buses for the free bus service burns down. And there just isn't the money or the willpower to rebuild their fleet of buses, and it quickly collapses after that.
Looking back at the 1880s, how do you think the struggles of Toronto's labor movement, especially the Knights of Labor and the railway strike, shaped the city we know today? Are there any lasting lessons from this era that still resonate in today's politics?
I think, I mean, one of the lessons to draw from it is that balance between labor politics as a working class phenomenon and one as a sort of broader uh, political movement that draws in people for reasons beyond class, reasons of like the middle class reformers weren't necessarily out to change anything about class structure, but they were looking to improve the lives of working class people. So I think one of the failures of the movement in the 1880s was the Knights of Labor never really caught that balance between respectability and resistance. And it was one of the features of the Knights of Labor. It was always at its core one of its flaws in terms of having a lasting impact, because the movement really did die away pretty quickly after this. Um, was that the Knights of Labor was actually not very fond of strikes. They didn't see strikes as a very effective tool, in large part because they were worried about this respectability side of things. They saw their role more as exerting sort of the implied power of a united working class rather than what we would call today class warfare. And so they were sort of caught between two sides where the workers, in the case of the Toronto Street Railway workers, would really be pushing for more aggressive action. We need to stand up. We need to fight this. Whereas the leadership of the Knights of Labor was very much concerned about the bigger picture and how do we present a respectable working class movement that really sort of fed into their idea of the free bus service, because this is a labor action that the middle class can probably get behind, because we're not forcibly stopping anyone from doing anything. We're not derailing trains. We're not blowing anything up. We're actually providing a service. The problem was that uh, for many workers anyway, it wasn't a fight. It was an attempt at accommodation. And so the Knights of Labor were sort of caught between those two poles. They were never able to fully resolve it. And I think that's something that you see even today with the NDP. The NDP is constantly caught between what is it a labor party or is it a much wider middle class party? And I don't think it's ever fully answered that question satisfactorily.
So, one last question is, what happened to the villains in this scenario? What happened to Frank Smith and the Toronto Street Railway after their seeming victory?
So that's an interesting story, actually. Smith, in sort of a reversal of the first element of the strike, where where he lost on paper, but in the end managed to wheedle an advantage. In the conclusion of the strike in June, Smith actually emerges looking victorious. The strike is broken. The workers come back. He's still running the company, but in the longer term, it's actually a defeat for Smith. Uh, one of the harshest critics of how Smith has operated his railway is actually John A. Macdonald. From Ottawa, John A. Macdonald sees Smith's battles his workers and with the people of Toronto as detrimental to the Conservative Party brand, because Smith is a senator, he's a cabinet minister. So what Macdonald sees is the Conservative brand being damaged by this greedy business owner that's causing all this damage. So he loses a lot of his pull in Ottawa out of this. MacDonald really blamed Smith for a lot of the votes, especially working class votes in Toronto, moving to the Liberal side in that next federal election, 1887. So Smith loses political ground. He also loses a lot of influence among Toronto's Catholic population. As I mentioned earlier, he was seen as a bit of a champion for Catholics because he represented them in the political sphere. He employed Catholics at his railway company. But out of this conflict, many Catholics start to see him as he wasn't really helping these Catholic workers. He was exploiting them. He becomes not a champion of Catholics, but a capitalist who is doing more than anyone else to exploit Catholic labor. And finally, and sort of the last dagger in Smith's career as a transit guru in Toronto is in 1891, when the charter expires, the 30-year charter, that the city decides they want nothing to do with Frank Smith. They're going to go in a different direction. They actually get a railway contractor who worked on the CPR to come in and electrify Toronto's transit. So it's really the new charter in 1891 that you get the beginnings of Toronto's transit today, which is an electrified streetcar system where Frank Smith is sort of shuffled off into the past and largely forgotten.
I think that's a good place to end it. Greg, thank you so much for coming on today. Can you please just remind us again about the book you've worked on? We just want to remind the listeners again.
Sure, yeah. So it's the Making of Canada, coming out May 6th, available hopefully anywhere you've ever bought a book.
That's great, guys. So remember, again, we'll have that information in the show notes. And thanks so much for tuning in. This has been another great episode of Muddy York. Thank you very much, Greg Koabel, for coming on to the show. We appreciate you. Thank you for sharing our love of Toronto history. Guys, make sure to like and share this podcast, especially if you're new to the podcast, you're coming in from one of Greg's feeds. Please come in and like and share the podcast. It's how more people get to share our love for Toronto history. And we can put it in at the end. Adam, do you want to share our credentials, or I can cut this out and we can put it at the end?
If you'd like to email us with any thoughts or comments, you can find us at muddy_york@outlook.com. We have a Twitter feed at muddy_york. No, that's wrong. You don't know this, but this happens every time we record. We've been doing this for a year, and I cannot remember the damn names. Okay, so we're going to stop. When I said our Twitter feed is and we're going to come in here. Toronto_history. We have a Blue Sky account at Muddy York. That's all one word. And we have a Facebook page at Muddy York History, all one word. We will see you in 2 weeks.